And we're live.
And we are live. Wow.
So, Mel and Ryan, first of all, we're absolutely thrilled to have you both. But welcome. How are you both?
Fantastic. It's great to be here. So thanks for having us. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, highlight of my week. It's a Monday, so that's saying a lot.
Okay, well, even though it's a Monday, we'll take it. You had a whole day to have other amazing experiences. So thanks for that. And before we go any further, what are you guys drinking? We'll start with you, Mel. What do you have in front of you there?
I'm drinking a beautiful Cab Sav, actually. Petaluma Cab Sav. Very smooth, rich, deep, perfect for a Monday night.
Oh, that's
or Tuesday. Or Wednesday.
Any day that ends with a Y.
That's amazing. And Ryan, this is even more fun for me because I know that you're in the Adelaide Hills and you're surrounded by vineyards, but what do you have for us? What are you drinking there?
Yeah, I've got a buddy of mine's wine actually, called Beal & Co. He makes it up in Lobosol. He's a cracking young winemaker. Actually, they're hit pretty hard by the bushfire, so if anyone wants to go out and buy cases of that, I highly endorse that.
What was it called?
What's it called?
It's called Beal & Co. B-A-L and Co. This one's a little red, the 2018 vintage.
Oh, amazing. If anyone wants to go support Beal & Co., please do. Enjoy. Well, we're drinking actually something quite special for us, actually. We wanted to mark the moment of kicking off our first ever podcast at Work Drinks. And so the first time that we set up the studio and we tested out all the tech, months and months in the making, but we finally got it and we hit record. Dean came over with a special bottle of, I'm going to mispronounce this, Giro Sangiovese Merlot. Amazing wine. Amazing wine. So another one
Sounds
for your list
beautiful.
of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Mel.
Before
we kick off, I also wanted to mark the moment because it is special for us. Our first podcast, months in the making, and just say, first of all, to you both and Dean and Sammy behind the microphones. Cheers. And to a good conversation. Looking forward to it. Welcome to Work Drinks.
Thanks, mate.
Having us. Cheers.
Cheers.
Alrighty. So, after all, we are a podcast about experiences of young professionals and, getting your career kick-started and moving your way ultimately to be at a point of, the top of an industry of some sort. So let's not waste any time. I'll throw it over to you, Ryan. I'm interested to know where you began your career or how you began your career and what were the motivations behind the industry or the job that you chose.
Yeah, man. Well, I kind of fell into it. I thought I wanted to be a jazz saxophone player, and we had some guy come to our school and talk about UBS cadetship. I had to check that wasn't like a hardware tech storage device and had to Google what finance was. So I ended up being convinced to apply to that and spent 3 months on Khan Academy figuring out what finance was. Before that, I was an English major. Was lucky enough to get the gig and spent my first 4 years in Sydney. So I studied full time and I worked at UBS full time, which was great. It was an amazing kind of entree into the industry. The end of my 4 years, I got offered to go to Hong Kong as part of a program that UBS held. So I was supposed to go there for 6 months and I ended up being there for 2.5 years. I think I'm still enrolled in the law degree that I deferred in order to go there. And yeah, that was amazing. So I spent 2.5 years in Hong Kong, worked super hard, but had a really incredible experience. The tail end of that, headed back to Sydney for a role at Monash Private Capital. Spent 4 years there across, a range of different industries and different sectors within the finance game. And then most recently, I was a director of 2 of our portfolio companies. And then, we'll get into it later, but tried to take a year off to work in a restaurant. So we'll leave that for a latter half of the show.
Sounds good. And, I'm particularly interested to know about the experience of working full-time at uni in a job like investment banking or at investment bank while also studying full-time, because that does seem like a unique experience and one that would be incredibly tough and grueling.
Yeah, I don't want to play up, there's not a whole lot of investment banking you do when you're 17. Like I was doing some pretty menial work, but it was no, it was good, man. Like it was hard, but you know, there's that like it's something that I've kind of carried with me for the rest of my career is that, you know, that Parkinson's law, which is that like work fills the time that you allot it. So like if you've got 2 hours to do something, you'll get it done in 2 hours. And if you've got 6 hours to do something, you'll get it done in 6 hours. And so like rather than having a weekend or a week to do a university thing, I would have an hour and a half. And so you just had to get it done in that hour and a half because there wasn't any other choice. So yeah, I think, you know, it was tough, but it was fun. Like it was, I worked with some great people. University was super fun. And, yeah, I think that was the big takeaway for me throughout that experience was just kind of learning that we expand or contract given the kind of variables that we set ourselves. So kind of going forward, I've made sure that kind of I only allow myself a certain amount of time to get things done.
How did you find investment banking? What were you doing in investment banking? What did you love about it?
So I when I was in my cadetship, I kind of started out supporting the traders. So like I was just running their books. And then the first front office job I had was in the asset management side. So I was in a multi-asset, we call it a hedge fund, a long short fund. So that I loved. You work with some incredibly smart people. I think what initially broke me, what ended up breaking me was the kind of pace of the work and the volume of information that you have to consume. But my first entree into investment banking was more on the advisory side when I went back into Monash Private Capital. So no, I'm under no illusions that I was doing banking when I was 17.
Yeah, wow. And so I hear that you learned a lot about how to manage your time, but I'm curious, what did you sort of attribute your learning to? Was it working full time or more university? How did you sort of weigh up that learning experience after the 4 years?
I think what helped was being able to see what I was learning, and how it applied to my real job. So when we were doing stats, you look at these distribution curves and so what, and it was the first time I understood the VAR models that we used to run for kind of pricing risk. And I'd known the inputs, but I never really understood the theory. So I kind of had the opposite experience to what you have at university, which is you learn a bunch of theory and you don't know where it applies, where I used to do a lot of stuff without not actually understanding the theory that underpinned it. So, I think that really helped with being able to frame whatever I learned in a practical context. So it meant I'm like, oh, cool, no, this does make sense and this is worth spending time on.
That's an interesting place to start your career, definitely a unique one. Mel, I'm also interested to know where you started out your career and what led you to start in that particular job or industry.
So I studied pure economics at university, and when I really was really open to what my first career was going to be. So there were a few things I really wanted. I really wanted to join a global firm. I really wanted to get amazing training, and I really didn't care what that industry was going to be. So my first job from a pure economics degree, obviously, was coding COBOL. So I joined Accenture. Obviously, absolutely zero skills in any software. Had a great time. Went to Chicago where I learned how to code COBOL and did that for 18 months. And I learned a huge amount about attention to detail, and realizing that I wasn't necessarily great on absolute attention to detail that you need for that. And then I moved from that, but it was a great learning. I mean, it was learning to be completely dropped, to take a huge risk because you're completely out of your comfort zone with a whole bunch of people who've studied it for 4 years, and do something completely different, but doing it because you know that it's a really growth, the IT sector, massive growth industry at the time, and you had global opportunities and they were going to train you from scratch. So it was it was an amazing opportunity. And then after And I think Ryan and I, so we've got two things in common. I grew up in Hong Kong. You spent a bit of time in Hong Kong and clearly loved it because it is the best place in the world, apart from Sydney and maybe Adelaide, potentially. Adelaide because of the wine. And then shortly after that, I joined. I decided I wanted to go into investment banking. I figured out that there was an awful lot of creativity happening in investment banking and in structured finance. So I joined Westpac and then went to Bankers Trust in structured finance and then Deutsche Bank, and just loved it because it's working with organisations across any industry possible, solving complex capital raising, solutions, developing them for people. So that was really fun. And I think Ryan's absolutely right. You're with really, really smart people, which is somewhat intimidating and exhausting, but fun because you are in these sort of problem solving because you are really solving the most complex capital raising problems for people.
Yeah, wow. Incredible. A lot in that already. And for me, I always find it incredible. It almost surprises me often, but I've heard it a lot around how people talk about creativity within the finance industry. So I'd love to ask you a question around that in a moment. But before we move past it, you in Chicago, Mel, Ryan, Hong Kong, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what the experience of working overseas so early in your career really gave you both. Maybe Mel, if you could kick off first.
Well, for me, it was training. So I trained in Chicago. So I went and I was there with an intake of Accenture people, 250 people from all over the globe.
Wow.
Learning COBOL and training, which was the best experience ever, really, just having that opportunity. But I'd love to hear, Ryan, do you want to do more global roles? Would you like to be overseas, traveling more, living in different countries? What are you thinking? What did you learn from that Hong Kong experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think, what have I learned? Yeah, so I think I learned that Australians are a rare breed when I went overseas. In that, so I, in Hong Kong, the kind of management there was Swiss German senior UBS bankers. And there's a kind of laissez-faire approach to dealing with senior leaders that Australians have that can be quite confronting sometimes when you go into other cultures. So I think what I really like about Australians is that we are respectful of people, but we're not deferent. And I think that kind of holds us in good stead in the long run. You find a remarkable number of Aussies in high positions in New York and London and Hong Kong and wherever. But Mel, to your point, yeah, no, definitely. I'd love to go overseas again. I think rather than a hard skill, I think the soft skill of being in a place where you don't know anybody and having to kind of force yourself, it sounds a little lonely, but force yourself to make friends is a hard thing to do. And I think, in a weird way, I kind of found that I've sought that now, in that, you get a little, when I came home for a few years, a little comfortable, and now kind of I'm seeking that again. I think putting yourself in that position, one, you meet amazing people. People in Hong Kong I've now got mates in, best friends in Amsterdam and the US and Morocco. And I think unless you go overseas and put yourself through that, you kind of, both from a professional side, but also perhaps as importantly on a personal side, you just kind of get a broader perspective on the world, and, you have friends that are, all over the globe. So I think that's a massive highlight for me. Mel, do you keep in touch with the folks that you met in Chicago?
I do. I mean, I just went to Berry for a weekend for a birthday, and two of the people there were from Accenture, from Anderson, for my first job. So, we formed great links. But I love your comment about forcing. We all get really stuck in our friendship zones and comfort zones, and I think it's great from a work perspective. And I like the fact you're doing this, Ryan, is you've got to take risks, I think, in your career and get yourself out of your comfort zone with your friends, with your learning, and with your career and where you take yourself, which clearly sounds like what you've been doing.
Yeah, I think there's I know something that I had a lot, especially when I was younger and coming up to university, is this a fear of linearity, in that, there's a kind of a clear process that you go through. You know, you get into a good university, you get good grades, you get a good undergrad job, you try and get promoted. And, you know, I know speaking to, you know, some folks that I know that if you veer off that linear path, it can be a bit scary. But I think forcing yourself away from that linear path can show you that, you know, if you're not an associate at 26, it's not the end of the world. And there are so many things out there that you can do that are outside the kind of the Sydney finance sector. So I think, you know, just allowing yourself to see what's out there can provide some comfort and can force you to work a bit harder, because there's some really impressive people that, you know, they're impressive people here, but, you know, you find out that there's a lot of impressive people around the world. So it's a good yardstick to keep hold.
And I think I think finance is a really good grounding, actually. So getting that investment banking platform and grounding bottom up, you get to see a whole bunch of different industries, you get to see a whole bunch of capital structures, different cultures, different people, different challenges. You get to see, you know, organizations in very different stages of their transition. So to take all those learnings, I think you can almost do, you know, the world's your oyster in terms of how you take that grounding to do different things in your life. So I do think it's great to not have a linear career path. It's good for lots of people, but I think really forcing yourself to take risks in your career, get yourself out of your comfort zone and jump into the abyss is terrifying, but equally, you know, you're just never going to get the experiences if you don't go through that.
So, I mean, from what I hear, I hear investment banking being painted in a very positive way, you know, from the skills that you learn. But something that I also picked up there was the concept of a linear career trajectory or progression. And something that I'm quite familiar with, or that I've heard, you know, other young professionals follow, is this concept of starting out in an investment bank, doing 2 years there, being put through the ringer and quitting or exiting and finding your way into other opportunities. You know, whoever wants to answer this question, why do you think that's something that exists? Why do people want to join investment banking for that short stint and find their way out of it potentially as quickly as possible?
Mel, you want to take this?
I forgot. Actually,
No.
my daughter, who's 23, she's just about to start an internship at an investment bank. So there you go.
We can't show her this podcast then. We can't show it to her.
So just keep it really quiet. Listen, I think it's very seductive, the concept of joining in, which it was when I started. Everyone wanted in the 80s, everyone wanted to be in investment banking because it was seen as the pinnacle of where you can join if you're really smart, right? And I just sort of got through the back door, but that's true. Whereas I think, and then when people get in there, and I think particularly, I'm going to sound old by saying this, your generation, you just want more of a life, right? So I don't know, often in certain areas, investment banking, you're there working till 3 or 4 in the morning, right? And it takes a big toll on your life. So I think people then reflect on exactly what Ryan is saying. I'll be interested on what sort of it's also quite transactional, right? So often people say, I love this and I've really enjoyed it, but I want to go out and build a business or be entrepreneurial and build something. Whereas investment banking often is more transactional in nature. So I think it attracts really smart people, and a lot of those people become quite entrepreneurial and want to use that to do different things. Don't know what you think, Ryan?
Yeah, and I mean, to be clear, like I also kind of got through the back door. Like I was a cadet and then got straight to the buy side, which is typically, if you want to kind of go on the sell side, buy side. Sell side's more like your broking, investment banking. Buy side is your kind of the PE funds management world. So when I went to Hong Kong, I went straight into the buy side and then actually came back and did some advisory work here. But in terms of the rationale for the 2-year stint, and I think in their defense, you know, a lot of firms are, you know, doing a lot to try and, you know, adjust for the new kind of working expectations. You know, I mean, it sounds kind of laughable, but, you know, like forcing Sundays as a day off, like is I think what Goldies did. But then I got to Mesa and said I just did 7 days of work in 6 days. So I think it all evens out. But, like, it makes sense to me. One, because, like, choosing what you want to do at 22 is really hard. Like I'm 28 and I still don't know what I want to do. And it's a validation thing in that you really put through the ringer on your grades, on everything. And so it's kind of a stamp of approval for whatever you want to do next. And you do get genuinely amazing training there. And I get what for forever and a day, if you spend 2 years at Goldman Sachs, wherever you go, someone will go, tick, they know how to work hard, tick, they're clever. And then for them, whatever they do, they go, I'm ex-Goldman. Because it doesn't matter what you do. You spent 3 years at Goldman Sachs, 15 years later, you can still say I'm ex-Goldman Sachs, because it shows that, you went through and you put in the time. So I understand it, but then the flip side of all that is that it's not the be all and end all. And if you don't get that internship, you don't get that first grad job, your life's not over. Your career isn't over. There's still heaps of stuff. But in terms of an initial validation process, I completely understand it. You get trained really well, you show that you can work hard, and it shows that you're clever. But doesn't mean that if you don't get in, that you're not any of those things.
Yeah, amazing. I'd love to pick up the red thread of creativity that you mentioned before, Mel, because that really intrigues me and I'm curious about it. But then also, I hear, amazing skills. The training is excellent. You can go anywhere, apply those skills. What do you actually tangibly take away from that experience? What are the skills that you actually learn in investment banking that can sort of serve you well throughout the rest of your career?
Well, I think one of them is hard work. The second is creativity, because, it is really competitive. Every investment banking is pitching for work. So you have to be thinking for any organisation you're working for of what is your angle to offer them something someone else isn't. So, a strategic insight. So you actually, as an investment banker, you get to work with very senior people in organisations you would never normally at a younger age. So you get that opportunity for them to share how they're thinking strategically, where their challenges are, what they're thinking from, an M&A or IPO or whatever, and how you can help them on their journey through the capital you provide in all the different forms to be really successful. So it is really, it's often a really strong partnership between investment banks and, and it is particularly coming out of a structured finance background, because structured finance evolves all the time. You've got to come up with something different and smarter and better all the time. What worked last year is not going to work this year, and it's not going to be successful, and it's going to be commoditized. So it is quite a good one around learning that things become commoditized really, and I think you can take this to everywhere, become commoditized really quickly, and therefore you've got to be ahead of your game. And that's why I think people work there and do it, are so successful, because they're always having to think of, how do I do something better than everyone else, which is, but listen, I think Ryan's point is really important, because if you don't get a great internship or an investment banking, it doesn't mean anything at all. I mean, I think some of the smartest, the best people I've ever met, who I really admire, are the people who've had so many, and I have, let me tell you, so many knockbacks in their career, and they've just built resilient. And the best people are the resilient people. I mean, when I left, when I was wanted to get into investment bank, I went and saw these search firms, and they said, you don't have the skills, you don't have the grades, you don't have anything. You can't possibly get into investment banking, right? And I just thought, well, yeah, I'm just going to ignore that, because that's what I want to do. I went and did some more study, and I got in, and it was sort of like, I actually went back and said, I did, So when people tell you, no, you can't do this, or you haven't got the grades, or you haven't got, that's the biggest opportunity, and that builds the biggest gift you can have is resilience. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, Ryan.
Yeah, I agree. I think, finance is a weird game, right? So when you're very young, the highest value skill set you have is like attention to detail and, arguably a capacity for boredom. And you go through a lot of stuff late into the night, and you have to have a dedicated focus on it, right? So you do a year or two of that, and then you get kind of slowly away from the grunt work. And why I find finance so interesting is that the kind of mechanical skill that you learn of modeling, of building that, of building Excel and PowerPoint, anybody can do that. It's not actually that hard to do. It's like a foundational thing that you need to know because it helps you think logically, and you're able to translate qualitative narratives into quantitative stories and so forth. But as soon as you get beyond grunt work, where your real value add comes in is in those kind of qualitative inputs, right? And so as you get more and more senior, it's the creativity that Mel touched upon in terms of finding deal structures, identifying new clients, when you're building forecasts, it's in terms of bringing in a notion of history, of statistics. If you go into the public market side, everything is second derivative. It's understanding not only what a value is, but what other people think the value is. So I think why finance, I'm probably going off tangent here, but I think, building into that resilient side, you work super hard on a certain skill set, and then almost every 2 years that skill set gets made redundant. So, that's a pretty amazing experience to keep going. So every 2 years, whatever you learn, and that's what you should be aspiring to, that every 2 years you're not doing the thing that you did last month. So no, it's a cracking industry. It's hard work, but it's a good gig to have.
Cool. So I picked up on what Mel was saying, or a keyword that Mel was saying, and that was knockbacks. And I think that's a good sign to segue into, I guess, the next stage of a young professional's career, where things are starting to move forward. You're making a bit of progression, and you're starting to become, I guess, yourself in your industry. You're no longer just a grad. I'm wondering, Mel, was there a big learning day for you, whether it was one day in which, things just really clicked into place, or similarly, things went completely wrong and the light bulb went off in your head and you realized this is what I need to do to take things forward?
I think for me, I've had lots of transitions in my life that have been COBOL to investment banking. I went from Westpac to Bankers Trust and then Bankers Trust was bought by Deutsche Bank, and I ended up in Deutsche Bank, and I stayed there for a while and left. And I decided that I was going to set up a portfolio. That was a big transition in my life. I thought, I'm just going to try a whole bunch of different things and give them a go, right? So I think I was completely addicted to coffee because I had so many coffees with so many different people. And I'd say it doesn't matter what age you are. If you want to go and have a cup of coffee with someone and ask for their advice, or, how should I think about what should I do? I don't think people will ever say no. They're always happy to help. And then I decided as a result of a million coffees that I would embark on a portfolio of interests, of which one was to do a startup, right? To be a CEO, starting with a blank sheet of paper of an unsecured personal lending business. And that was the best experience of my life because, starting with a blank sheet, getting it to actually just almost to launch and the GFC came, but building out a company bottom up by really bringing a bit of that investment banking lens is how do we make sure every single piece of that is better than what is there now for, better, the operations are better, the customer experience is better, the funding package is smarter, we've got the best people, highly motivated, really keen to do it. And when you start and you don't have any incumbent structure weighing you down, it's really powerful. And I always say to people, and I think Jeff Bezos says this, you should always try and think about what you're doing as a day one company. If you were starting from scratch, what would you be doing today? How would you be thinking about your day to have an impact and really, deliver something today? And it makes a big difference, I think.
I love that. Day one mentality. Such a good thing
day
to
one.
sort of hold on to. We're day one. We're going to keep keeping this mentality as well.
You are day one.
Exactly.
Exactly. This is your day one. How's it going, day one? Exactly.
I don't know.
I think
good
it's going
wine,
well.
Good company. Sam's back there having a lounge. The tech's going great. But I wanted to, you kind of kicked it off there around some of the questions you were asking yourselves as you had that blank sheet of paper in front of you. And so I want to know, what are some of the key things that you learned in sort of having to hustle through that moment of starting your own business? And then also, what were some of the questions that you asked that you would advise other startups to ask themselves in order to get going?
So I think the real question was, am I going to, it's that diving out of this secure job with income, with skills that you really feel confident you know what you're doing, into the abyss, right? It's literally jumping off the diving board and hoping there's water at the bottom. And so it was the questions it's questions to say, can I actually do this, right? And is the value proposition, can we really build something here because of the insights and the people we can surround us with that is better than what anyone else is doing? And you almost say, well, why can't we? And you have to flip it and you say, well, why can't we do this? Why can't we do this better than anyone else? And just saying, how do we surround ourselves with the best people to do that? And it's really quite empowering, right? It is. And then just, if you've got that, we can do it. And then every time you have a knockback, you're like, well, we can get through that. We'll go this way, we'll go that way. And you just power through, right? Because you've committed to get this thing done. And you've got money behind you, you've got private equity, high net worth money sitting behind you, and you just power on.
I sense something there about being almost realistic or honest with yourself in terms of what you can actually achieve. And I think that theme is one that's very relevant for young professionals, particularly in this day and age, because our generation's grown up seeing those crazy overnight, tech sensation stories. And I've got, a lot of friends and peers that want to tackle every big mission, want to create these what would cost multi-millions and billions of dollars to get off their feet. So I think something important that I got out of that is actually, knowing when things are within your reach to actually drop it all and give it a go.
No, I think that's right. And surrounding, I think that's exactly right. Figure out when you need to build some sort of core experience level behind you, I think, through what you've done, that you can bring to bear some skills, and that people around you will have the confidence to join you on that journey because they understand that you're credible in what you're trying to do, and you've got some really important skills to bring to bear, and they believe you that you can actually do it. So it is important. It's quite interesting that you can. I think everyone wants to go and change the world, and I love that. I think you don't want to disrupt, and even if it completely fails, because 90% of startups fail, right? The skills and expertise, you might blow a bit of money on the way, will carry you for the rest of your life.
And I think, Ryan's waiting to answer this question. Haven't you just founded a company yourself?
Oh yeah, that's probably ambitious to call it a company at the moment. No. No, I've had a weird year like everyone has, I think. So, I spent, after 10 years of slogging it out in finance, I wanted to take a year sabbatical to work in, first of all, actually, was first to go pick grapes and help my buddy make wine. And then the bushfires happened, so that got shut down. And then second was trying to get an apprenticeship chef, which I very lucky landed a role in a beautiful restaurant called Mount Lofty Ranges. 5 weeks into that, COVID happened. So I happened to have a bit of spare time in lockdown. So I started a little consulting business called 15H. It's a long story where that name comes from, but it was more just there's a bunch of folks that I really like working with, it's a range of startups and kind of a few finance firms, and got a few clients down here in Adelaide as well now. But it's like a little boutique advisory business. It's going a little too well. I'd prefer to be a little less busy. That's where I'm at now.
That's a good problem to have, though. It sounds like.
Yeah. No, it's been fun. It's but I mean to the point of putting yourself out of your comfort zone and kind of testing yourself. Like, I think that's super important. Like, if I think back on what I did, like I went from Sydney to Hong Kong, which is a big jump in and of itself, and then kind of spent 2.5 years in a macro investing. To be very candid, I think I was pretty bad at it. And then went from macro investing to rather than the traditional lane, which is kind of like you start micro, then move up. I started macro, then went to kind of private equity, which was the whole, you have to see, well, was I good at that job or can I do other stuff? And I think it's kind of a scary thing to put yourself through the ringer, but it's super valuable, because then I went from there to, a whole bunch of different sectors. Then I was like, well, can I cook? So that's, that's a completely different one. But, I'm on a bit of a tangent here, but yeah, from my company side, it's going fine. It's nothing to write home about, but the experience of putting yourself consciously into new environments and new circumstances, I think is a really valuable thing to do.
Yeah, wow.
I mean, I love the fact that you've done, while COVID's on, you have done so many different things. I mean, you picked up so many different skills, which will make you think so differently about everything you're doing. So what are you looking to do with your consulting business? Like what success look like for you for that business?
So where the name comes from is this essay by Keane called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. It was written in the 1930s. And it forecasts what he thought the world would look like in 100 years' time. So we're coming on 90 years since the day of drafting. He was completely wrong, like utterly wrong. But it had a really nice undertone to it, where his prediction was that the way productivity curves were going was that we would have solved what he called the economic problem. And the economic problem just meant that we could make enough stuff for everyone that people could elect to work. That was his idealization. Bertrand Russell had a similar concept in an essay called In Praise of Idleness. But what he got down to was that essentially the desire in all of us to work is so innate that we're not going to lose it in a couple of generations. And so his concept was that, working 15 hours a week would be enough to satiate that desire. So as a bit of tongue-in-cheek to the fact I used to work 15 hours a day and I'm striving to get to 15 hours a week. That's why I ended up calling my little finance business 15 hours. But yeah, success looks like, I've got a longer term view on the over financialization of our society. And it's kind of, having a few select clients, or like clients is a weird word for it, like people that I really like working with that are kind of long-term partners. So having 5 to 6 of those, that you're kind of, their go-to person on any, transaction, any strategic advice, which, I've probably got 3 or 4 of them now, which has been really lovely. And yeah, doing other stuff as well. So it's kind of, I'm trying to figure out a way to have finance not be such a consuming industry. So I'm seeing if I can keep it, within a certain amount of my life while still, being a chef and vaccinating goats and all that other crap that I'm doing at the moment.
Wow. So we're going to have to schedule some more time in, because there's just so much richness coming out of this conversation. But I do want to ask, because some of the themes coming through for both of you really is around some really interesting decision making. And so I know, Mel, you've described your career as extremely opportunistic, and having just heard that, Ryan, I would say the same for you. So as you go through your career, what are some of those trade-offs or decision-making models that you might have in your head, or how do you guys go about actually making some of these decisions to really go out and, as you said, Mel, jump into the abyss?
Ryan, you go first. I'll follow up on after you.
Well, I think, how do I say this? I think it's just a recognition that nothing is as scary as it seems at the outset. And, the most recent example of deciding whether to take a year sabbatical, right? That was a big decision. And it was, I was kind of analyzed all the, I was a bit lame, but I literally had a mental decision tree, which is like, okay, I take a year off, if X, then Y, if Y, then, alpha. And I kind of went down that path of, okay, I take a year off, I leave on good terms Either I want to be a chef and I've just discovered my newfound passion, fantastic. Or I take a year off and I realize I hate being a fantastic. I resolve that. I'm not too far out of the industry to go back into it. And at the end of the day, it's just it's a year out of my life and a couple of fun stories to talk to on a podcast. But and so I think I like whether it's a decision tree. I mean, if you want to go into decision making, there's a whole bunch of literature on mental models. Then there's a great blog called Farnham Street, which shows a whole bunch of them. Charlie Munger's got a book called Poor Charlie's Almanac. But I think it's a baseline. It's just think reasonably about these things. From the outset, it can seem pretty nuts that I abandoned a pretty good career to go chop onions and wash dishes. But if I gave you the kind of linear reasoning that got me to that point, it got to the point where I was like, it doesn't make sense to me not to do it. So I think it's being open-minded, realizing that life's short and you should go do stuff that you want to do, and that weigh up risks and so on and so forth.
I love it.
But actually, I would much rather hire someone who's got that, right? Who's doing all these different things, who has all, people are, if you're working 15 hours a day doing something, you're very single dimensional as a person, right? And the insights you're getting are single dimensional by definition. Whereas if you're tending some goats and chopping onions, you're a really interesting person, right? And I think your point, Ryan, which I really liked about, it's just not having a fear of failure, just saying, I'm going to give it a go. And being confident in yourself that you can tell people why you're doing what you're doing and you're confident about it. It doesn't really matter what other people think. If you want to spend 12 months tending goats, well, good on you. That's sensational, right? That you're doing what you really want to do and you love and you're going to give it a go, right? And I think it makes you a much rounder, deeper, richer person who's going to have a lot of fun in their lives, rather than waking up and saying, what have I done with my life? I've just done this, right? I think you've got to give lots of things. One thing that I really loved was working with the Big Issue, right, on a voluntary basis, because the Big Issue has, for a lot of the stuff they do, it's a 30-year strategy, because it takes them 30 years to do what they're going to do, right? So you just get so many different insights. So don't be afraid to jump out and, like Ryan, and try a whole bunch of different things, being a chef, doing all these other things. And why can't you have a portfolio of interests where 15 hours are for that particular business you're doing, and then 2 hours with the goats and 3 hours as a chef? Maybe chef's hard because there's a lot more hours. Why can't you do all of it?
I'm learning that being a part-time chef is very hard to do. But I didn't know that before. And I think, to Mel's point, it kind of harking back to my original thing, if the context of this discussion is pursuing a career in finance, we bring it back to the baseline point that the mechanical skills of finance are pretty easy. So the kind of overlay, once you know how to build a model and you know how to do a presentation, you have to think about, as Mel touched upon, things get commodified super quickly, right? So it's what value are you adding? And if you're just the same linear trajectory and kind of boring at dinner, it's hard to justify that you add value, in any context, because as the robots take up more and more of what we do, saying that you're good at Excel isn't going to be enough, and saying that you're able to even derivatives pricing, and all that stuff is not already gone, will be gone in the next few years. So as finance, as the sector shifts to the kind of mechanical skills being automated, you have to think about what do you add on top of that? So, if I come back into I kind of already am back. I try to get out, but it's been hard. There's just and this wasn't my intention, but having the capacity to talk about stuff that's not working hard, I hope add some value.
I love the fact we could actually be, everyone could be commoditized. So we talk about products being commoditized, but unless we're doing getting really different skills and growing those skills will be commoditized, right? Exactly your point, right? It's a commoditization of human beings with AI. So get all those different experiences in your life.
Ryan, I don't want you to reveal your secret sauce here, but I'm very interested to know how you envisage a world in which, you know, finance can be reduced from what is that 15 hours a day to 15 hours a week. So I'm interested to see, you know, what you think that looks like in a sustainable organization with many employees, or even a few employees.
Yeah, it might bring out my Marxist energy, but it's no, it's really hard. It's really hard. I think I mean, there's some structural forces that if you have a large organization with, you know, highly paid employees, you're incentivized to do a lot of stuff. But I think I mean, rather than how to set up, you know, it's very hard to set up a company that only operates 15 hours. But I don't know how to do it yet. I'm trying with one employee, and I find it extraordinarily difficult. I'll let you know when I find out. But I think it's more of a, and it's hard to do early in your career. And I actually, in a kind of perverse way, I don't recommend doing this early in your career. Like, work super hard, get your stripes. Because a large part of the reason that I could do what I'm doing now is that, you know, I've worked with a lot of these people for a really long time. I didn't have a weekend for, you know, a year and a half in a row. And so when I say to them, hey, I really want to take a year off to go pick grapes, you know, they're sympathetic to that cause. So I think, you know, I wouldn't recommend a first year grad to try and do what I've done. It's a really bad idea. Earn your stripes, get some credibility, and then it's more of just a philosophy of I think COVID has kind of accelerated this and brought it more into attention. But that, you know, work is a good part of our lives. But I'm you know, I think especially in this industry, it can form perhaps too much of our identity. So it's more just of a philosophical reframing of like, yeah, you know, you can do other stuff rather than just be a financier. So 15 hours, I think, is, you know, if Teams was wrong, the guy's much smarter than I am. So I'm not going to poise the solution to the overworking of the economy, but it's more just a pursuit of trying to, you know, balance it a little bit more.
Yeah, amazing. I'd love to shift gears here. And Mel, I'd love to start off with you, unless you have a quick sort of comment or build on what Ryan just mentioned.
I was just going to say, I think really, I agree that you've got to put the cookies in the, you know, you've got to build up credibility. I think that's really important, so you can leverage that for your time off, skills and credibility. But I'd also say, if you're working along as, be really clear what you're doing it for and what you leave, why are you doing that? And I think, if you go to work, and it doesn't matter what level you are in an organization, and you think of yourself as a leader, I think everyone, it doesn't matter if you're the grad or right at the top of the tree, if you think of yourself, everyone should be a leader in an organization. And I really believe that strongly. And what a leader in an organization means is they care a lot more about that organization and where it's going and what the challenges are and what their managers' challenges are and what the whole organization than just doing their job. So go to work every single day as a leader, and that will frame really carefully what you do during that day to make a difference and add value.
That's incredible.
Really?
I love that. I just wrote down that quote. Think of yourself as a leader in the organization. I'm going to actually, straight after this podcast, I'm back to work. I'm taking that mentality with me. So thanks for that one, Mel. So I'd love to, you know, shift into one of the things that I'm really curious about. So this is more of a personal question, I suppose. And that's really focusing in on something that you know intimately, Mel, which is around the board. Obviously being on a number of different ones. One of the things that I've reflected on as a young professional sort of coming into the workforce is there's lots of things that you pick up on, right? So you know that organizations get steered by boards in terms of the strategy and the direction that they're going. But more than that, you don't really see behind the curtain. I have no idea what boards really do in reality. So I'd love to pick your brain a little bit as to what does a board do in reality? And having been on a number, presently at the moment, but then also in the past? What makes a really good board member?
So what boards really need to do, I think, and it's increasingly the case, is really deeply understand and agree with the purpose of the organisation. And you hope that that purpose is an enduring purpose that is going to be there for 100 years, right? And that purpose should anchor every single decision that organisation makes, and how they run. So that is by far the most important thing. And then what a board does, because managements come and go, and board members can be there for quite a lot. Can be very short in recent cases, or very long, right? But if you're there for a long time, then often what you'll find, particularly in ASX, is there's a real drive with remuneration and with a lot to short-term thinking, right? But a board really needs to think deeply around how do they, from when they started that organisation to when they have built value in that organisation, through keeping that organisation really focused on their purpose and building enduring strategies, underpinned by that really important purpose. So that's one really important thing. Anchoring the organisation to purpose, building through governing long-term strategic value for everyone. That's for all stakeholders, not just the shareholders, but for the consumers, long-term value for consumers, long-term value for employees, for all your suppliers, for everyone. That's how you should think about it. Then I think you need to make sure that you have the best possible CEO and leadership team. And that can be fit for purpose for a particular time. So an organisation in turnaround may have a very different leadership team than an organisation in growth. So you may need to think about that over time. So I think every single director is terrified of that Kodak, the Kodak thing, right? That you're sitting on a board and it disappears because it just failed to understand that every single part of the world has changed. And then the other one is setting the tone from the top, which is really supporting management, but helping management grow and build and understand, helping, because board members are often in lots of different boards, bringing that outside in. And I think this is the same for any leader, and that's yourselves. How do you bring an outside in lens to everything you're doing? Because you're looking and understanding how the world is changing, what it means for your particular business. So how do you think about what are the insights and the contributions you can make? And you set the tone. I think you set the tone as a board member from the top, and it cascades down through an organisation. So board members are not setting the right tone. If you're cranky with the CEO unfairly, it gets kicked all the way right down to the person at reception, right? It really does. So I understand that the board set about making decisions and about doing the right thing, right? So boards are really important. It may seem a long way away, but hopefully they're not, because boards would like to get closer to everyone. And I think companies are flipping, right? They're flipping the model. If it's going to be properly understanding consumers, the consumer has to be at the top and the board's almost at the bottom, right? Just making sure that stuff at the top works to make sure consumers are really actually getting what they want now and into the future. You're delivering something of value.
And Mel, before you mentioned, the concept of having young leaders in an organisation and an organisation being purpose-driven, and I know particularly our generation, I'd say more than any generation before, is very much attached to the concept of purpose, and we interact with organisations that we genuinely believe in, their purpose, their mission, their values. Is there, are you seeing a changing dynamic where young people are being invited more towards the board setting, or how can that work in a way where young people are consistently invited to have a seat at the big table per se?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I have to say, on one of my boards, we had, I think she was an intern, come and present on a particular issue, and oh my God, we all felt we should resign. She was so impressive. I think, how do you get to the top 10? Well, I think the most important thing is start presenting up, right? So find opportunities to think like a leader, think strategically, add value, right? And then you get to present ideas because people want to listen to what you're saying, and that cascades all the way up, right? And then you start growing in the firm. But I think equally directors would benefit from a lot of reverse mentoring, right? Because you guys see things really differently, and I love the 15 hours a week. I think that's wonderful, actually.
If you want me to join the board, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, and I think, how do you really imbue your thinking about organisations into organisations to make them better places?
Yeah, incredible insight. One of the bits in the AFR that I was super excited to read about a few months ago was that Telstra appointed their youngest ever board member with Bridget Ludon, and a few weeks ago Oz Harvest bringing in Yasmin Poole. So I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities. I'm just waiting for my invite, personally.
I think we need complete diversity. So I'm very happy for all sorts of diversity on boards, right? But equally, if it's not at a board level because you haven't got necessarily all the experience, there may be a subcommittee of the board, which is a technology and transformation committee or a strategic committee. So find ways to, and if there's any town halls, go up to a director. And the worst thing is being a director is if you're at a drinks thing at a company and you say, and someone will say, so what do you do? And you go, I'm a director. Everyone goes, ping, and they run away. Just come and say hi, come and talk, because we'd love to talk, right? So seek out directors, have a chat to them, share your views, speak up. We love it.
So if you work at an organisation where Mel's a board director of, stop running away from Mel at drinks, okay? That's the key thing to take away from this.
Come and have a glass of wine with
Yeah, we'll have a glass of wine with you, Mel. But I want to move us on. And Ryan, I want to kick off with you because we are approaching time here. But
and we're out of wine as well, which is problematic.
Out of wine. I've got a whole bottle down here, Dino. Okay. Don't you worry about that.
Yeah. We can go all
Ryan,
night.
Starting off with you, again, to sort of mix it up and to take it to a new part of the conversation. But, not too far gone, you were 21 years old. And I guess if you had your time again and you got the opportunity to speak to your 21-year-old self, what would you tell him? What advice would you give him?
Jesus.
Jesus?
Jesus. Yeah,
Is that becoming a priest or something?
No. What would I tell my 21? I mean, it wasn't that long ago, 7 years. No, it's good question. No, I think I'd probably say take myself a little less seriously. And I think also, to Mel's point, like I found mentors super, super useful throughout my career. Most recently, Jeff, the chairman of Monash, was incredibly, it's still, I left the firm and we still WhatsApp about random things probably twice a week. And I think to Mel's point in terms of, when you're reaching out to folks to become a mentor, kind of, counterintuitively, the more senior they are, probably the more willing they will be to grab a coffee with you. It's more daunting to reach out to super senior people, but, when you're young, you've got your own shit. I don't know if you can swear on this. You've got your own stuff to worry about. Whereas, once you get more senior, I think no one gets to where Mel is in her career, without the help of anybody. So, so it's, I think when you get to that point, you start to reflect on the fact that there were people that helped you. I know me personally, there's a lot of people that helped me get to where I am. So I think, shoot for the stars when you are asking for, folks to chat to or to touch base with. I think that's probably a key piece of advice I'd give.
And Mel, I think we're going to have to ask you the same question. What would you tell your 21-year-old self if you had the opportunity to do so?
Was it just a couple of years after Ryan? I'm just saying, just
yeah,
one or two.
many.
Listen. I really like Ryan's comment. Don't take life too seriously. Honestly, be patient. I've always not been good at being patient because. And sometimes opportunities come to you and you think, oh, no, that's not on this path. And, it doesn't quite fit what I'm thinking. But really deeply stop and reflect and think about, should I do that anyway? So I would just say take risks, give everything a go, and enjoy yourself, right? Just enjoy yourself and be resilient, right? If we're all going to spend a lot of time in our life when we get feedback, and feedback is a gift, right? So suck it up, take it. So, I think the hardest thing is to ask for feedback, actually not say I don't want the good stuff. Tell me the bad stuff, right? And it's really hard for that person to give you that feedback. It's agony, right? So what they're doing is the biggest, best gift. So I would be saying from 21 onwards, really actively take feedback, step back and really thank them for the feedback, and really deeply reflect on that feedback and what it means around, maybe the feedback is this is not for you, right? You're, a fish out of water, you really want to keep doing this, or, you just need to think differently about how you're doing what you're doing, right? And that is an absolute gift, and you should thank people if they're prepared to give you that sort of feedback.
Amazing.
I'd also say don't have too many drinks at work drinks. That would be another key piece of advice.
No, always drink responsibly.
That is definitely key.
Yeah. 21-year-old self, that would be a key piece of advice. Great.
Great advice. Thanks, Ryan. So we're winding down here. We're getting towards the end, but I'd be remiss to miss the opportunity around, often these conversations between experienced professionals and young professionals don't really take place in a way where you can sort of bring it together and talk around that intersection. So I'd love to give each of you the opportunity to ask each other a question if you feel like you've gotten through the conversation and haven't had that opportunity yet. We'll kick off with you, Ryan, if you've got something.
Yeah, I think I'm super interested as to that inflection point from working within a company to being, a member of the board of that company. Kind of both from internal and external factors, like how did you know you were ready, and kind of what prompted you to make that leap?
I kind of straddled it, to be honest, because I figured that, so I've been a non-exec for a long time while I was also exec, because I decided I was going to do a portfolio. So even when I set this startup that I was working on, I had 2 non-exec roles at the same time. So I just decided that as a board seemed to be terrifying, intimidating places, right? With all these people who didn't really understand what they were doing. And I just thought, actually, the best thing to do if I want to be in a senior role as a CEO or work my way through, I needed to understand boards better. There's no better way to do that than to sit on a board. And I think doing that, and there's lots of boards you can sit on at any age. There's boards, there's not-for-profit boards where you can really contribute deeply to them. So I think the aim was to say, as an executive at a certain stage, I would like to sit on a board, and as a board member, I understand how boards think and the questions they're going to ask, which makes it really easy when you're writing board papers, because you can anticipate the mindset of a board member. And I felt as an executive, it made me a better executive. And as a non-exec, I was a better non-exec because I had contemporary executive experience when I was running NRMA's funds management business. I also had 2 boards. So I just felt like it rounded me out as a person. I did government boards, I did not-for-profits before I did sort of more commercial boards. But so I think it's a piece of a puzzle, like you with the goats and the chef and the, all the stuff you're doing. It could be a piece of a puzzle of what you're doing. That's something where you think, I can contribute. I can do things from a board perspective where I can contribute. I can provide thought leadership for a not-for-profit, or, there's lots of amazing things you can do with boards that are sort of out of just the sort of the mainstream boards.
Cool.
So,
Thanks.
So I'd be interested in your, where to now, like, where are you thinking now? Where to from now? What are the other tools in your toolkit that you're looking to pick up?
To refine. I'd love to learn how to build a house from scratch. I think that's the next one.
I don't think that's a 15-hour week job.
No, that's not a 15-hour thing. No, I think we're like, I mean, my hope is that, COVID's been it's been a rubbish time for a lot of people, myself included. I'd like to think that coming out of this, we've reframed the things that we value, namely family and friends and so forth, and that, there's a way that we can interact, throughout all levels of an organization in kind of a more humane, I think just the fact that all these Zoom calls we've been having, you've got CEOs that are in their, fancy suits and MS ties with kids running around the background and dogs yapping and all that crap. So I think just reflecting that, not the farce of a workplace, but that there is a layer that we put on when we go to work. And I'd like to be a part of that kind of next stage of not of capitalism, but the next stage of kind of how we work. So I think a more humane approach to finance per se, but a more humane approach to working. I'd love to be it's very germane, and I think we're all trying to figure out where this is all going. But I'm excited to see what happens next.
Well, guys, I mean, that's some amazing insight as we've had for the last hour and 8 minutes. Conscious of time, so we should probably wrap things up. Thank you so much for joining us on the first ever episode of Work Drinks. We had a great time. We learned a lot, and we are quite confident, our listeners, that being, mostly young professionals, are going to get so much out of this. So thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having us. It's been wonderful talking to you both, and great questions. Well done. And Ryan, it's been really lovely to talk to you, and hope to keep in touch with all of you.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Mel. That was fun. It's funner than I thought it would be.
It was fun. Yeah. It was really fun, actually.
I'm glad it was funner than you thought.
Work Drinks going to the top of the charts on the Apple podcast charts.
We'll be there very soon.
Speaking of top of the charts, I might just ask one bonus question before we wrap up. And I know all young professionals will want to know this one. And this one's to you, Ryan. How do you chop onions without crying?
A sharp knife, and you just cry. Just covered.
Sounds like your first 2 years at an investment bank.
Yeah, just covered.
Guys, thank you so much.
I think that's like
Guys, thank you. Have a great evening. Couldn't pick 2 better people to do our first time on the podcast with. So thank you so much.
We're very privileged to do it. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks.
Cheers,
guys. Bye.